we're optimistic about this team last year. However, we didn't realize that Arthur Smith was a giant Karen. But the Atlanta Falcons, they went 7-10. 7-10, 7-10, and then finally they got rid of what they thought was the root problem, which was Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith was the guy who's like, I want to take a skill player in the top 10. They're like, you do that, Arthur Smith. Take Kyle Pitts, supposed to be the next Megatron. He's like, okay, I'm gonna draft him, then not know how to use him. Like, okay, I'm going to use Jonnu Smith more than him this season when we sign him as a free agent. What the hell is going on? And then after that, he takes Drake London. Drake London has been fine, but for a top 10 wide receiver, has he lived up to that? Absolutely not so far. We see plenty of top 10 wide receivers like a Jamar Chase come right into the league and start lighting it on fire. Now, is that the fault of Desmond Ridder? Probably. And it's also a little bit of Arthur Smith. And then after that, they're like, you know what? Let's take Bijan Robinson in the top 10. All right, you're offensive head coach. That's pretty optimistic. And then I'm not going to use him. Going to say he has the flu because I like a senior citizen, Cordero Patterson, and Tyler Algier. Shout out to him. You're actually awesome player. But Bijan Robinson was taken in the top 10. Make him the guy.
And he was drafted 8th overall.
8th overall. Make him the guy. But no, we go 7-10, 7-10, 7-10. And then Desmond Ridder, we chose him over the likes of talking to the Ravens about Lamar Jackson. We're like, we're fine. We have Desmond Ridder over Russell Wilson. We're fine. We have Desmond Ridder over anyone with a living, breathing pulse who's better than Desmond Ridder. We are fine. We have Desmond Ridder. And last season was a culmination of a lot of disappointments, a lot of missed opportunities here, but are they screwed cap-wise? Do they have some optimism where, hey, we may have a pretty good first-round draft pick and we may actually have some cap space to go out here and compete with some of these other teams trying to sign an edge rusher, which we need, or someone like a Kirk Cousins or a Ryan Tannehill, who we need?
So their cap space isn't terrible. I mean, they have $33 million in cap space, which is kind of around the same as the Carolina Panthers, although they have less holes. Their offensive line, they have some fine players. They have Jake Matthews and Chris Lindstrom under contract. Grady Jarrett is signed. Those do take up a lot of cap. However, they can restructure a lot of these deals. Like, for example, I see Jesse Bates as a guy who jumps off the screen for me. Could save $8 million if you push the cap down a little bit. Same goes with some of these other guys. They're 2 offensive linemen they signed. If they restructure, they'll free up about $9 million apiece. And a couple of players who could be cut. You could see a player like Caleb McGarry, that'd save $5 million. Or in this case, you could see Jonnu Smith as a cut candidate, save $6.5 million if you cut him. Or Taylor Heineke, who's definitely going to be cut, saves $7 million to cut him.
Yeah.
So we're looking at about $20 to $30 million that you could free up and then go after someone like Kirk Cousins, who is tied to Atlanta. Kirk Cousins with, you know, Bijan, with Kyle Pitts, with Drake London, and some of the other talent that they have there. Definitely think that that team looks a lot better with Kirk Cousins than Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. God bless their souls. I'll look at their free agents, but overall, I don't think their cap situation is nearly as bad as Carolina's or this other team that we're going to talk about later, who's also in their division.
What about Justin Fields? Is that a situation where they have enough capital this year where maybe we give up someone like Kyle Pitts, Tyler Algier, because the Bears need a running back? We have Bijan Robinson, want to give him the keys. Maybe we take a running back in the 3rd round here with our pick to replace Algier just so we don't have to give him too much money here. Then the Bears get probably a 2nd round pick, maybe another 2nd round pick next year down the line, and then we throw in Kyle Pitts and Tyler Algier. Is that a situation you could see working out for them?
Yeah, and I think also, you know, Justin Fields is entering his 4th year, right? And I think that getting out of Chicago is inevitable for him, and I think Atlanta would be good. They have a good offensive line, better offensive line than Chicago. Their weapons, at this point, they're pretty comparable, but I think that that'd be a good fit, especially because Kirk Cousins is a little bit older. He is coming off of a major injury. So if I'm them, I would probably move more towards Justin Fields. If he works out, you can pay him. And they don't have as many holes. They have fine players on the defensive side of the ball. I'll go over their free agents in a second that are notable to point out. But for the most part, I think that Justin Fields, if he can work in Atlanta, then they could be the division winners
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, if he can work in Atlanta, and that's definitely a big question mark for me. I see some like interest in taking a quarterback in the second round. Your pick this year isn't high enough where maybe if you have a guy like a Michael Penix drop down to you or a Bo Nix, you consider it, or another good dual threat quarterback coming out of it. But we do know Desmond Ritter is not the answer. We need to get another quarterback in here. So with me, when I hear Raheem Morris coming over from the Rams, the first thing that piques my interest is potentially Carson Wentz going to Atlanta, at least as a backup quarterback, especially if you move on from Taylor Heineke and you can save on the cap enough where you don't have to pay Carson Wentz to the level as someone like Taylor Heineke. Potentially, he would be a good backup mentor for a quarterback if you take him in a second round or even start the season. Then you can get your quarterback into it by the next year that he plays.
Yeah, I think that's a fine plan. I think Carson Wentz should definitely be a backup because we saw how valuable the backups were this year.
Yeah.
So I think someone like Carson Wentz is going to find a job because of it. Now, they're free agents. We mentioned how bad the Carolina Panthers free agent situation was. For here, we have a couple of players who are free agents, but they're guys that they're old and you can probably find a replacement for. First one, who I'm surprised even still plays because he's been playing my entire life, Calais Campbell.
What?
Yeah, Calais Campbell, he played well for them last year.
Yeah.
And he's still very, I mean, for a guy who's 38 years old, he's like, I don't know, maybe this is blasphemy to say, but he's like the defensive line version of Tom Brady. He's been playing for like 15 years and he's been good pretty much everywhere. I don't know how he does it. Cordell Patterson, I mean, he's their third running back at this point, / wide receiver, / punt returner, / kick returner, / whatever else he can be.
Yeah, he does everything. He is who Taysom Hill wishes he could be.
Yeah. And then other than that, like Jeffrey Okudah played better in Atlanta than he did in Detroit, but I think you can be fine replacing him in the draft. And then Bud Dupree, who is 31. I think
Bust.
You can probably move on from him. Mac Hollins, Van Jefferson, Scotty Miller.
Van Jefferson, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mac Hollins too.
So
he's okay.
So there's not really anybody here where I would say you have to re-sign them. I mean, if you want to re-sign Bud Dupree or Calais Campbell's pretty cheap. You can bring him back.
Yeah.
Veteran presence, sure, but Cordell Patterson, he can either retire or he can go somewhere else. Jeffrey Okudah, he'll go somewhere else. He's not exceptional. He's probably pretty cheap. He's a fine second corner for him, but I think you could probably find someone better in the draft. So free agent wise, there's not really a lot of players for them that I would say they have to bring back.
Yeah, there's no one where I was like, "Ooh, that's terrifying if we lose them," like Frankie Louvu, which we talked about with the Panthers. Make sure you check that video out. Or someone like a Brian Burns, who's asking to be freed for a couple of years now. So no huge free agents you want to lose there. And then you have Raheem Morris as your new head coach. Hopefully he does what D'Amico Ryans did and bring someone over from that Shanahan or Sean McVay tree to be the offensive coordinator. So if you can get someone like that in, then you have to either draft or sign a quarterback depending on what happens with Kirk Cousins this year. So for me, Atlanta, you have a defensive coordinator, so I think the first thing he's going to look at is, okay, your pass rush wasn't really that dynamic last year and we got burned a lot. So you need to focus on corner, you need to focus on the pass rush, and then you also have to focus on quarterback. Their offense, really, there's not too much to improve on besides maybe a better tight end than Kyle Pitts, which I think this is the year on the docket. Trade Kyle Pitts. Hasn't worked out in Atlanta. It's time for you to have a fresh environment for you, and hopefully your career takes off, but just didn't work out here how we thought it would. And then adding a second wide receiver to go along with Drake London. I think you do all four of those things or can address it in the draft, then you're putting yourself as one of the top contenders in this division. I just can't put them there until I see them getting a quarterback this offseason. And if you get that position right, everything else will fall into place for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the top of them, I think Justin Fields would be the most attractive for them just because of the upside for him. And then everything you mentioned, wide receiver, if you want to keep Kyle Pitts for one more year, that's fine. I can totally see that happening. But I think for them, they're probably going to focus on a defensive player in that first round. There's plenty of good linebackers and edge rushers, so they go maybe that direction, especially to replace Calais Campbell. But other than that, like quarterback is definitely their priority because I think they're not quite, I would say, a quarterback away, but I think that they're a quarterback away from a playoff team.
Yeah, definitely. They're a quarterback away. Desmond Ritter just wasn't able to get it done. Taylor Heineke is not the guy. And when you have that level of inconsistency, that's the number one thing that will demoralize a team there. But I think obviously number one is getting a quarterback. You have a defensive head coach now. He's going to want to fix your pass rush and get some edge rushers in there. And then also after that, a luxury would be getting another really good wide receiver to go along with Drake London. Whether you can trade for someone like a T. Higgins or a Brandon Ayuk, just get someone else in the building who can be dynamic and make a play. Or you go out there and actually get a legitimate tight end and settle for just a two to go along with Drake London.